Okay, welcome.
Good
Welcome.
morning, everyone.
Yes, good morning. We're so excited.
Finds everyone doing good. We have
Oh, you know what? Somehow I think we're getting Kelly. Oh, Kelly, I think we're getting Terry somehow, weren't we? So now we're good. It's so good to see everyone. We have two big meetings going on at the same time, and I think we were getting stuff going on with those. So thank you for being here today. We've had a little bit of folks. We have a couple of folks that have from schools that have called in and said, please record because I want to see this, but we're covering some COVID classes. We understand that. And so our group might be a tiny bit smaller today, but we're going to record and send it out to everyone. We are excited that I'm going to start sharing my screen. We'll get started. So as we give just a second for everybody to get on this morning, I'm Jamie Spagnardi and I'm from Greg, as you know, and we're going to take a look at these puppies. And I want you to open up the chat box, please, and tell us, how are you feeling today from 1 to 6? Which one matches how you're feeling? Allison's going to be watching our chat box and reporting about what's going on.
We have a lot of 4s. We have a lot of really happy puppy dogs that look like, actually, I feel like it looks like my dog I grew up with named Spotty. We'll just call him Spotty. He was the happiest, sweetest dog.
He was the sweetest dog.
They're all 4 so far.
Oh my goodness.
I kind of feel like I'm 4, but sometimes I have a 3 wing. You know how when you do those Enneagram studies, you have wings of different things? I kind of feel a 3 wing a little bit. Let's see. 4 is today, but Thursday and Friday predicting a 6 from Kyle Cassidy. It's going to be crashed.
Well, I have to say, last night about 10 o'clock, I felt like a 1. Had nothing to do with anything about work, though. I bet I did feel like a 1, but I've recovered. I'm feeling more like a 4 now. So thank you for sharing. Now, Allison's also going to place in our chat box our sign-in sheet. And you know the magic of the sign-in sheet, it sends you a certificate if you sign in. So we encourage you to do that. So as always, you know, at Greg, we give you a great big hug. We wish we could give you one of those sausage biscuits or a yogurt with fruit on top and a good cup of coffee and soft drink, but we can't do that. So we hope you've got yourself a little nest made, but we want to remind you that someday soon we'll be able to do that again. So Allison, you want to talk to us, just to remind us a little bit about Maslow and about this special time?
Yeah, we always ground ourselves. Actually, since our very first meeting happened at the start of the pandemic, and so we always ground ourselves in Maslow. And we started off with questions like, raise your hand if you have had a hard time finding meat at your grocery store, right? Because there were meat shortages. Raise your hand if you're worried about groceries, okay? And you can just raise it in your heart. You don't have to actually raise it. Then we said, raise your hand if you're having a hard time finding cleaners. Then we said, raise your hand if someone you know has been laid off from their job or lost their job, or they're looking for a new job in the pandemic. Then we said, raise your hand if this is true of your family members also. I think we can expand upon that now, especially as more and more of our areas are red. Raise your hand if you know someone who has gotten the call that it's time to quarantine. Raise your hand if you know someone who has had COVID. Raise your hand if you have students that are affected by a loss from this, okay? Raise your hand if your school districts have had to shut down. Raise your hand if you have personally had that happen. So, and here's the kicker. Raise your hand if you're still doing all of the same things plus more that you would have typically done for your job. So I think it's important for us to remember the children are currently learning in environments and they're working at those safety and security levels. Are my basic needs met? Am I safe? And so it's harder for us to move to the higher levels, but it's important for us to know that our teachers and other administrators that are working with us are also in those same areas. And it's not the same as it was in March. Those things shift each day, especially as we get into the holiday season. People will grieve the loss of not being with their family members that are at risk, or they'll worry even if they do get together likely. Okay, so I just want us to just ground ourselves in that moment to remember we are going to make mistakes. We likely have made mistakes, but you already know a lot more than you did in March. And you're already more successful at things that you didn't know this time last year that you would even know how to do. So take a deep breath, breathe into your nose, breathe out your mouth. You are growing and learning, and we're just going to keep getting through this together. Okay.
Breathe like a bear. That's something we did at one of our meetings. This is what's great about being early childhood. You can act like it's an activity for kids, but it's really for us. Okay. And I think that's one reason I've always loved working with young kids. You know, I spent a lot of my life in that like second, third grade time of the kids' lives. And I think it's because I must be really in my brain one of those kids. So today we're going to be reminded of our goals and the practitioner sharing and network discussion. So here we go. You know why we were given this wonderful opportunity from the KDE and the Governor's Office of Early Childhood, and we're continuing that work. But I'm not going to talk too much today because I know you don't want to hear from me. You want to hear from Christy Bryce and Caitlin Bollinger. So Christy comes to us from the University of Louisville, but we all know Christy from lots of ways. In fact, Christy's one of our friends of our family, I'll have to say. So Kyle and Christy have been sharing the same office. We just learned that she left him a hand sanitizer. Now that's the gift of love.
And window treatments.
And window treatments. So when you look at Kyle's office, you're going to see Christy's window treatments. Kyle just hasn't had time to change it. That's what it is, Christy. And then Caitlin Bollinger from Christian County. Oh my goodness. I've just met Caitlin, but I already feel like she's been in my heart, because when we talked about our beliefs and our understandings of what needs to happen in early childhood, woo, right on target. She's going to share from her classroom. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn this over to Christy.
All right, I think we're good now. So good morning, everyone. And it's so nice to see some of my old friends over here. I see these little thumbnails and I miss my Warren County people. So it's nice to see you all. But we only have a few minutes together. So really it was so difficult for me. And if you know me, you know this, to distill what I want to share down to like the most powerful 15 minutes. And so there's really only so much that we can do this morning. So it's kind of a sprinkling of information. But what you're going to leave with are some resources. I'm going to show you how to get those so you can return back to those when you have some time outside of this meeting. But I'm Christy Bryce. I was in Warren County for many, many years, had the opportunity to learn from a lot of awesome people there. And so I'm now an MTSS consultant with University of Louisville under Cybers. But I was a special ed teacher and a school psych. So that's a little bit about my background. So I encourage you to connect with me on Twitter if you have not already. In fact, now that they have the new fleeting, little stories, I added an experience that our Elf on the Shelf is having currently in our house. So that's worth looking up for fun. But I would suggest you do something here, create 2 tabs or 2 windows. We're going to toggle between the 2 of those because I only have 15 minutes with you. So I want to give you some resources that you can come back to, just like I mentioned. So on the second tab or a second window, type this in your URL. And just as a reminder, when we use Bitly, we don't search it under Google. You actually type that up in the URL box at the top. And I think it may be case sensitive. So it's the bit.ly/early grades. And if you could give me some thumbs up when you have found that document. And you have 2 options for virtual thumbs up. I can see a few faces and I see a few thumbs, but also you can use the reaction feature and actually plug a fun thumb right on your screen. So if you have issues, I encourage you just to chat maybe with Jamie or Allison, and they'll help you get there. But when you arrive at the Bitly site, oops, hang on here a second. You're going to see a document that looks like this. That's how you know you're there. And I love when I see all of the anonymous chameleons and elephants, so I know that you have found your location. So first, I have to give props to Kelly Davis and Jamie and the GREC team, along with Elaine Aguilar, for creating this type of agenda. My team has altered it somewhat, but it was built upon Elaine Aguilar's awesome book about instructional coaching. So you'll see that on this link, on this document, you have basically a plan for our morning, which is super short. So we have to just barely cover each of these topics. But the first one being best practices for distance learning, utilizing small groups, and then providing intervention. So those are the three things that we're going to be talking about during our time together. But these links, what you can do is like make a copy of this document. And if you'd like to take notes yourself, then this is your space to do that. All right, so let's jump in. So I don't know if you guys know much about this yet, but there's this whole world out there called TikTok, right? You've seen the kids coming in and they're doing their dances and all this stuff. Well, you've probably been scared of TikTok, but if you get in there, there's this like all these worlds. So I've made, and it has these algorithms that plug you in and take you in these directions based on what you watch. So how long you watch it and things like that. And I have entered the world somehow of teacher TikTok. There's a whole teacher TikTok happening. So I want to share with you a couple of the fun teacher TikToks that are out there.
Bobby, I can help you. You don't have to take it to your mom. I can help you. Don't do that. Don't take it to your mom. She's in the bathroom. Felicia, are you at Chuck E. Cheese? David, mute yourself. Hurry. Hurry up. Miss Johnson, we can't hear you. Don't whoop them yet. Okay, join breakout room number 4. Hey. Nobody's there. They left. Josiah, we see your tongue. You can stop licking the camera now. Yes. No, you shh. Stop shushing me on the camera. You shh. Casey, are you even in this Zoom class? Shouldn't you be in science right now?
Okay, so basically it's these little short videos, but I love them because I think they increase serotonin. It's my new leisure activity. So I'm going to show you the second one too. It's this one is actually one that's more of a really positive view of teachers and gets the word out about teachers, how hard they're working right now. So I wanted to share this one. So isn't that awesome? So let's jump in though. I just had to have a moment of like Allison said, a moment of grounding, and there's your serotonin. I think Kate Wintuska may be on this call, and I love her kitten serotonin that she pushes out through her Instagram stories. But I'm going to take you guys into some documents. So over here, we're going to toggle back to the interactive agenda. And I want to draw your attention to just a couple. We can't even go into all of these together, but the first one being the broad-based academic supports for all students. And when you go to this document, and these are all out of Ed Research. So a few months ago, Greg asked me to come share with some instructional supervisors and such some best practices around blended learning, intervention, distance learning. And so I just basically did this huge lit review of what do we know? This is chaos, this is September, we don't know what we're doing. And right then, very timely, these really strong research organizations started pushing out distilled information about taking what we know about education and applying to the current context. So there's so much out of our control. So what we have to rely on and come back to is the foundational practices that we know are most effective. So there are a few Ed Research documents in here. Now each one's 6 pages, but I want to show you that this is not just nerdy stuff. Like this is really helpful, succinct tips to drive the way we do our work. So the first page basically summarizes the question and the insights that they were able to gain from what the research tells us. So the remaining pages goes a little bit into the research. It has great links about this is how they did it. This is one example of a math summer camp that someone's used that was really effective. But what you can just do is just look at this one page, the first page. So you will see in these ed research documents, because this tells us what do we know, what, not just making assumptions or guessing, but what do we know? For example, one of the first ones they point out is this face-to-face instruction is particularly important for elementary students. So that is a way to advise our policy. If we have to make difficult decisions about which students are going to be in person, that this kind of information is what should drive those decisions. So you will see some ed research documents in here, and I'm going to summarize those for you in these next couple of slides. The first one being what we know about distance learning. And a few of the most important things I want to point out to you all is that rather than using intervention to replace or supplant our core instruction, number one, we know that that's never a best practice in in-person instruction, but it's also something we have to be very cautious of for distance learning. And they actually recommended, based on the literature, not to go back and try to reteach everything we've missed, and instead keep accelerating learning with appropriate scaffolds. So that's a different way. I remember this being a big debate in the fall, especially what do we do about the instruction that we think kids lost? And interestingly, a lot of the information that's coming out is that the majority of students can catch up. We need to continue pushing, and we need to support and scaffold, but accelerate their learning. And one of the most important pieces of the literature I want to point out, because this is going to drive the rest of our discussion, is that synchronous class time is most effective when done with small groups versus the whole class. So I want us to spend some time together talking about the small group setup. But if anybody knows me, you know I can't stand not to just at least mention a little behavioral, social emotional piece, even though that's for a whole other training. But just some reminders about our best practices, things such as using private corrections with students. I know I've overheard even in some classrooms things like verbal corrections to the large group, pointing out individual kids, and everybody zooms in and looks at that student's thumbnail, for example. But providing behavior specific praise, giving students many opportunities to respond. What are ways to do that? These things may seem like, yeah, we know this, but these are the things that for years, the foundational practices that we know set students up for success. So I hope that you all have PBIS or MTSS teams meeting and talking about these things. You know, with all of the operational issues that everyone's having to struggle with, if you can rely on your tiered intervention supports and those teams that meet in your PLCs, that's where we can make sure that we're coming back to foundational practices about student success, about student learning. And I'm going to keep us moving because I want to get us to the small groups. Okay, so some of the other information that is shared in those resource documents that I've attached is about small group distance learning. And I want to show you a particular piece of this. If we go back to how to create Google Meet. So this is when I worked in a district in a school position, one of the things I like to do when I would go connect with other educators like we're doing here is I wanted to leave there with something I could immediately take back to a team, to a principal group, to an instructional coaching group. So part of what I'm giving you here are tools you can immediately take back and say, all right, PLC team, let's reflect on what this tells us and what decisions can we make? How can this guide us? So one of the other great tips, and this is not a research article, but it's really great tip about how to use Google Meet for breakout rooms. And I know everybody's like, yeah, we know how to set up a Google Meet. We even know how to push out breakout rooms, but there are a lot of tips that make those more effective and less effective. How to monitor multiple breakout rooms happening, for example. So this particular article is a great one, super practical. So what I would encourage you to reflect on that one and consider sharing that with other teachers. as well as the virtual station rotation. This is another great resource. In fact, I want to draw your attention to slides 5 through 8 specifically. I thought they did a nice job succinctly summarizing what are types of activities you could do in these small group like station rotation setup. And it even gives an example of a primary sample schedule and an intermediate sample schedule. So I just wanted to bring your attention to those two specific documents. But what we know about, whoops, not that one. What we know about a small group is the power that comes in creating smaller learning communities, especially for our early grade students. It also gives the opportunity for the teacher to connect with the small group, to differentiate, to provide intervention, remediation, acceleration with the smaller group, because it's so difficult to do that with a large group. So to me, the only way I can get my arms around the idea of differentiation is with small groups and station teaching. So it just seems to me that that would be a lot of the conversation with our PLCs, is how do we do that effectively? Some specific tips, and if you've not been on Catlin Tucker's site or follow her on Twitter, I would encourage you to do that. She has great, really practical articles. And I've linked a few of those there about the concurrent classroom and things like that on the interactive agenda. But she reminds us of things such as record video directions, create pathways for students to request the teacher assistance, such as assigning student leaders, because the teacher can't be in all rooms at all times. She also talks a lot about how we could shift the cognitive load from the teacher to the students. There's a lot of preparation that is involved before we can do that. But by building structures, then we can manage it and keep it rolling lesson to lesson, day to day, week to week. And tips such as using a timer, assigning kids as a team. They rotate through the stations as teams. Just some really practical tools. So that is in the, well, I love the 5 strategies for small groups, the concurrent classroom, but you really should go check out her blog. It's amazing, super practical. But let's talk specifically for our last few minutes together. And Jamie, am I okay? I got a couple more minutes.
Absolutely, you're good.
Okay, so the other piece that I want to share with you are these reminders about how do we effectively intervene with our young students. And some of the best practices fall around, this is not different for distance learning versus in person, but setting goals and monitoring those. And I did put a link on the document. We don't have time to watch that together today, but this sample video will take you to one particular teacher using breakout rooms to conduct oral reading fluency measures with students in early grades. And you can get tips from her, like she sent home a secret envelope that the students couldn't open until it was time to do their one-on-one fluency check with the teacher. And then she conducted the fluency check. The parent engaged and said, wow, he's really grown, and how many words per minute? And it was this like beautiful moment of, this is our chance to connect with our families. And assessment's a big part, and monitoring is a big part of intervention. So I wanted to draw your attention to that video. I think it's only like 5 minutes, but that's something to show teachers so you could think about how we could do that. But then also the National Center for Intensive Intervention is a great guide and has a lot of virtual pieces to it. So I encourage you to check out those sites as well. But it's a reminder of, these are the ways that we become more intensive with our intervention. So first, best practice we know around explicit instruction, guided practice, and independent practice, but always reflecting about how to increase the strength, the dosage and alignment, and the attention to transfer. Like when we feel like an intervention is not working, those are the questions we want to ask about that intervention. And we know for our young students, we want to keep these sessions very short, at least provide a lot of movement breaks. Okay, so I have to take you to these sites because they're so stinking cool. And I don't know if you've been able to check out the University of Florida's literacy teaching resource hub. So that is on you'll see right here, there's a link. And this is a larger, University of Florida has great literacy information. If Torgerson was down there, there's a lot of great information down there. Resource Hub has been in existence for a while, but they have really built up the virtual piece for the word work. So I'm in love with this site, and I wanted to share this with you. And this is something I'm also thinking like your literacy teachers in the early grades would really value. But the first one being, for instance, this virtual blending board. Check this out. So if we ran a small group with students and we shared this, we could talk about how to build words, and you can see it building over here, it's just beautiful word work provided digitally. And you can choose like what all blends, I want all the blends on here, or no, I just want to keep it simple and want none of those. And then that helps you build your tools here for building words, so the phonics work. But then also want to draw your attention, so they have it all the way down, and they have some phonemic awareness up to the word work and multisyllabic words. But check this out too. They have sprinkled throughout this site some practical, what they call for face-to-face instruction. But one thing I was thinking is I'm always asking myself, we know that we're having to send packets or whatever home to some of our students that don't have access to technology. And so I think we're not talking enough about how to make that work more engaging. And so I appreciated some of the tools they sprinkled in here, such as here's how exactly you could build a word work Velcro mat. And on this, like what I'm picturing, like we have to leverage people now in new and innovative ways. So how could we use, for instance, our instructional assistants to tutor students, or possibly to help us build some of these types of tools to actually send home as a more engaging work for students who don't have access to technology. And so I just wanted to share that particular tool for doing that. And finally, I want to give you an example of how we could be using Jamboard more. I'm hoping your teachers are already heavily into Jamboard, and it's really becoming, in fact, I think I linked some Jamboard templates, how to use Jamboard in the classroom. That one has even like 10 templates that you could build around. But the Jamboard, check this out. How I'm picturing a Jamboard in a small group is to provide each frame with a student's name on it. So it's the same work, but here's Tremont's, and let's back up this way. Here is Jasmine's, and here's Samuel's 5 frame that they're building. And just to make sure everybody knows, as a teacher, I can click that little arrow button, and now I could give some type of activity, and I can watch as each student builds that. See, so what if the student's down here pushing that into the frame, I can watch what each student is doing at the same time. So that would be an example of how you could do that with math. That's my Making Math Magic buddies that are so awesome. But then in literacy, the same way, I just built this one with just the letters of the alphabet. And I'm again picturing like, here's Tayshawn's jam, here's Sarah's jam, and then as Janie's jam. And then as the instructor, I'm watching the small group as I'm guiding them. So I guess I just wanted to start big, talk about distance learning and best practices, then talk about how we use small group, and then give you a few specific tools to immediately take back and use with your small group. And that is what we just did right here in like 15 minutes. So that's all I had. So I think in closing, I would ask you to do this. In the chat box, if you could share a specific resource or strategy in the 15 minutes that we just talked about. So we know self-reflection is really important, and reflection on our learning. Share in the chat something that you feel like you can immediately take back and either use or share with other educators in your school or district.
Wow, thank you, Christy. So I see that folks are starting to write in the chat box. So go ahead and write in some things you think you might be able to take back to your teachers, or you might be able to, use yourself. Some of these, we could use some of those same tools ourselves. So, I'm seeing some things come up so people can read the chats. Christy, you've given us a lot to think about for some time, because we can look back at those resources and see lots of things coming up in chat now.
Yeah, just to share some of the specifics that I'm saying, as Dylan White shared, he wants to share more about how to incorporate stations virtually with people. And I also found that interesting. A lot of times I'm seeing people just use it where everybody's doing the same work in all of the breakout rooms. And it's kind of like what's best practice in the classroom is what's best practice virtually, but we're going through all of those same schema to relearn all of that and what that looks like in the virtual world. So I agree that was useful to me too. Ms. Carlina has shared that Jamboard is something that she is currently exploring with students. So she was glad to see your examples. Mary just talked about how hard it is for a small group, even face-to-face. So to have these specific examples that are quality virtually is really helpful for us to share. The connection to Velcro. So, even if children have access to technology, sometimes I think with young learners, we get it wrong when we say, do you have a computer? Because even if they have a computer, they still need those physical examples just because that's what's developmentally appropriate.
And the offline time needs to be valued. So that's I appreciate your point, Allison.
Yeah. And I'm sorry if I've missed any, but I'm seeing there's just so many that are filled in there, Christy. So thank you so much that everybody has so many good things to share there.
Yes, thank you. Boy, that's going to be something for us to hang on to and look back on and think about for a long time. Thank you, Christy. So now we're going to move on to Caitlin, and Caitlin's going to share from her classroom view and show what's working. And, I think Christy has reminded us those things like stations. We've all done stations. We've known stations are the right thing. We call them centers sometimes and not stations, but we know that kind of experience is what helps all of us learn. And this brings it back where we can do it in a virtual way and face-to-face. Love it. You said instructional assistants could be working on making some of those tools. I know that sounds simple, but maybe I hadn't thought of that. You're right. I hadn't thought of that. So thank you. So let's go on. Caitlin, will you please share and tell us about yourself a little bit? I know you plan to, and tell us about your classroom.
Yes, I will. So good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here and present to you all. I do want to forewarn you that this is my first year in preschool, although I've been passionate from the start. So if there's anything that you have questions about, I'll be open for any questions at the end. So today I just
have been in kindergarten for a while.
Yes, I was in kindergarten for 3 years.
Yes.
Yes, and even though I was in kindergarten, I feel like I did bring a lot of the early childhood aspects into kindergarten because, like we spoke about before, typically kindergarten teachers are elementary ed degrees, and it's just there's a big difference in the early childhood degree kindergarten teachers and the elementary ed degree kindergarten teachers. So I do think I was very play-based in kindergarten as well. But I'm going to share today about my small groups that I do and just kind of how I'm motivated to have them serve as child-centered small groups. So just a little bit about myself. I have my bachelor's and master's in interdisciplinary early childhood education from Murray State. In 2019, I went on a research study tour in Reggio Emilia, Italy with 2 professors from Murray State. And I'm not even going to get on my soapbox about that because I'll be here all day preaching about how amazing that was. But basically, we traveled to Reggio Emilia, Italy, and I got to tour and be involved with the children there in the preschools and early childhood environments there, and it was amazing. But like I said, that's another story for another day because it was great. I taught kindergarten for 3 years, and then this is my first year in preschool. So when I do my small groups, I really try to focus on them being child-centered. So what does it mean to be child-centered? So to me, the goal of having a child-centered environment is when the children can explore and investigate and play within a space that's set up by me, who pays attention to the children's needs and their interest. So when I'm planning my small groups, I kind of have like a little A, B, C, D little technique, and just bear with me because my brain does get very excited about these kind of planning times. And so I tried to consolidate that and make it all organized to present. But the A, whenever I'm planning my small groups, I first analyze the pacing guide and the assessment data to reflect on the standards being taught and if my class needs to hit the brakes or if we're good to go and we can push on the gas. B, I bring in the students' interest. I really reflect on their playtime and ask myself, what have they shown interest in during unstructured playtime, and what would be interesting and engaging for them when creating my hands-on, authentic, and engaging activities for them. I target their interests, challenge their thinking, and meet their individual needs. And then D, I think about what am I going to do to assess them during the small group activities. So this is kind of what I look at. I first look at my pacing guide, and for the activity I'm about to share about, the pacing guide had stated that we were going to be learning about counting objects 1 to 10. We were going to be sorting and classifying. For literacy, we were going to be reviewing letters, specifically focusing on the letter M, and we were going to work with 2 to 3 syllable segment words. In science, we were going to learn about food groups. Social studies, we were going to talk about safety at home. And then I just pulled my little ongoing assessment data that I've had since their first day of school that I've just been kind of observing and assessing as each week progresses. And I look at that and kind of see about my kids and see where they're at and what's the next steps, and see if the pacing guide is congruent with where they're at and the skills that they're currently showing that they have. So then I started thinking about my students' interests. So specifically, one thing that I always realize is whenever we have unstructured free time, they fight about who gets to go in the housekeeping center. I always pick the children that are sitting very quietly. I ask them to, they can go make their free choice and decide where they want to go. And it's Skittles and centers that they will sit there and just be statues, because they know if they're the quietest, sitting the stillest, then they get to choose their center first. And they all want to go to housekeeping. They all enjoy the role playing there. They all enjoy the pretending that they're in their own house and they're baking. They just love housekeeping center. Another thing is that they love to get their hands dirty. They learn through the sense of touch. Anything that we have that we're learning about, they want to touch it. They love it. They love art, specifically painting with unusual art materials. So I've realized that when I typically give out like little construction paper scraps or glue, they're not as engaged in that as they are whenever they see things and they wonder, could I paint with this? And how can I use this to create something in art? And so they like things that they don't usually see as being used specifically for art. And then lastly, they enjoy poems, rhyming words, and songs. And so from my observations with them, they just really love it when something sticks in their head and then they can skip around the room for the rest of the day singing it. Or like I said, when they're in housekeeping, they enjoy that role playing. And so they retell stories during housekeeping, and they love the songs and rhymes and poems and all that. They really enjoy, like I said, having that stuck in their head throughout the day. So this is when I start to create the activities. I look at the standards, look at their interest, and then I develop what activities I'm going to do. And so I felt like during this process and reflecting on where they were at with their interests that week and what I was needing to teach, that I would read If You Give a Moose a Muffin, and then that just kind of flowed into us talking about the Muffin Man. And during our read aloud, we listened for the letter M sounds. We talked about words that started with the letter M. We recognized the M in the print, and we also did some syllable counting of the syllables and stuff when we talked about the words in the story and reflected on the story itself. Then we started to sing and talk about the Muffin Man, and they got really excited because they love it whenever they have a familiar song that they know and that they're confident in. And so they were really participating well when we were singing about the Muffin Man. So then we had our centers. And so for one of our centers, I had just some flour put into a big pan, and they were able to just freely decide what they were going to do with that flour, and they were able to get their hands dirty, and it really sparked a lot of great conversation. I just loved that during this time I was facilitating the centers, and so I wasn't dedicated to one specific center. I was managing and facilitating the centers over in my area, and then my co-teacher, she was facilitating the centers in the other area of the room, and I'll share more about that in just a second. But I just love that I'm available to help when they need it, but I'm also just able to engage with them and have those conversations, because that's where they start to communicate their learning, and they're sharing what they know out loud. And I just love that process because it's great for the children that are with them in the center. But specifically during this time, one of my students, the one with to the left over here with the measuring cup, I asked him, I said, what are you putting in your measuring cup? And he said, I'm making a milkshake. And I was like, oh, a milkshake. And we talked about how milk and milkshake and measuring cup all made the M sound. And so it was just a natural way to, again, reinforce that we were focusing on the letter M and making the M sounds and talking about the story and retelling. And to the right, my little friend, he had asked what would happen if you dropped the egg, and it was a fake egg. And so I love that he was given the opportunity to take the egg out and drop it on the floor and see that it wouldn't break. And we talked about how if it was a real egg, it would break. And we just had great conversation, and I love that part. So then at another center, I had made some homemade chocolate scented Play-Doh, and it was very chocolate scented. My whole room smelled like the chocolate factory, or it was a strong scent, but it was a good smelling scent. And they just had the opportunity to come and freely play at that center and create muffins, and again, retell the story, talk about some of the vocabulary words and things that they recall from the story. They can count and play with the muffin pen and count out how many muffins they were baking. And I also had some cookie cutters that were a variety of letters. So they got exposed to some letters that they recognized that were in their name or in their friend's name or the letter M. So they really enjoyed that. And then in another center, I had some M&Ms, and I actually had marshmallows as well, but I just didn't get a picture of the marshmallows. But I did not tell them what they were doing at this center. I just briefly said that we were going to practice some math skills and practice counting, and I let them kind of take the lead on how they were going to sort. I did have some muffin or cupcake holders that had numbers in them, as well as ones that just had little colored dots, and they could choose how they wanted to play. They could roll the dice, find a number, put that many M&Ms in there. They could sort them by color, as you can see. Or for one of my friends, he's very good at math, and I had the 10-frame cube, the dice with the 10 frames. I had that for teen numbers, and he had his cupcake holders had teen numbers in it. So he did some teen numbers with that. But I just loved, being able to observe and see how they were going with their learning in that center, and not having to hover or, be there for the whole time and dictate that. They did a very good job with that center. Then over here at Center 4, we had marshmallows and toothpicks and paint. And again, I didn't tell them what the goal was, didn't tell them it had to look like a certain way. I just invited them to create the letter M. And so each kid had a different version of the letter M, and I absolutely love that. This toddler over here, he's 3. He put the marshmallow on a toothpick and used it as kind of like a paintbrush and painted the letter M with some paint. This friend over here decided he wanted to glue the marshmallows on the letter M, and so that was fun and cute. And then down here, one of my little friends just wanted to create the M himself on a blank sheet of paper, and he wanted to use glue and the marshmallows and toothpicks to model the letter M. And so that was great to see his learning, and we practiced the directionality of creating the letter, going up and down and up and down, and they really enjoyed that. So that was a fun center as well. Then I had another center. This is my filler center. I had some chef hats, and I did not get a picture of them creating their chef hats during the time, so this is just my representation that I took for the slideshow. But they loved the chef hats, and the chef hats were a great filler because it allowed for, if any of the kids were finished with an activity and they were ready to go on to the next activity, but that activity was full, this was a great spot for them to go while they were waiting. And they just felt like it was the most magical hat ever, because once they were done creating their chef hat and we stapled it on their head, they transformed into the Muffin Man and the Muffin Girls, and they were no longer their names. I had to call them the Muffin Man and the Muffin Girl to get their attention. They really got into the role-playing aspect when they put these chef hats on, so they really loved that. Then this is the last center I had. I just covered up a table with some white paper, threw some letter M's on there, and yes, that is mustard and mayonnaise, and some baking utensils. And they explored mustard and mayonnaise. Some of them ate the mustard and mayonnaise. Some of them tried to eat the paint. and discovered the paint didn't taste like the mustard and mayonnaise, and then they didn't eat the paint anymore. But they practiced making the letter M. They traced that with the baking utensils, and they just collaboratively made this beautiful masterpiece with the mayonnaise and mustard and paint and baking supplies. And so I really love this open-ended exploration time, and this too challenged me because it made me think, do I want them to eat this paint? But don't worry, I have the non-toxic washable kids safe paint there. But I knew that they probably would want to lick it, and that's just a goal that I have whenever I create these stations and these centers and small groups. I ask myself, you know, what kind of stage am I setting up for this? What kind of invitation am I setting up? Am I, you know, setting up something dangerous? Or if I don't want them to eat it, then it doesn't need to be out. And just like with that chocolate Play-Doh, it smelled so good to eat, and everything that I made it with was edible. And you know, they'll eat it once and just decide it tastes disgusting and won't want to eat it again, but it's not harmful. And it's just a part of their exploration process. They want to taste things. They want to use all those 5 senses. And so I really love this center, and they got really creative with it. And the mask that I have to wear really helped with masking the smell of the mustard, because it was pretty strong too. So between the mustard and the chocolate scented Play-Doh, it was quite the fragrance in my room, but they really enjoyed that. So this is kind of the way that I had set up our small groups. Like I said, I enjoy being the facilitator. I don't really find that I'm effective with a set of 5 kids at a table, you know, just dictating the learning and you know, teaching that with the kids that I have this year. I feel like I'm able to manage the environment better whenever I have my space and my group of kids, and then my co-teacher has her space, her group of kids, and we're facilitating. We're just jumping in when needed. We're, you know, engaging, and we're having those conversations. And so as you can see, I have my 3 stations to the right. There was the mayonnaise and mustard, and strategically that's placed by the sink because they did want to touch it and get it on their faces and all that. And so that was just an easy place for them to travel and go clean up. And so I'm facilitating these 3 centers. She's facilitating the other 3 centers. And it really flowed well. And I just really enjoy whenever our small groups are set up that way. And even though I have these 3 centers to the right, I still travel across the room and engage in and talk and observe and stuff with the other tables as well. And my co-teacher's been great. She records her anecdotal notes as well, and we just write down any observations that we see, and we find that's the easiest way to assess during the time, so that we're still present, but we're not, you know, taking a lot of time to do some heavy checklist or anything like that. It's just, we like to, anytime we hear something great, we'll go and just jot it down real quick. So if you do not want to have 6 centers at one time, because I know that sounds a little crazy, another thing that you could do is you can split them up half and half. I have just really low numbers this year. In this class, I had of 11 kids. And so I found that if I split it up half and half, and I had 5 or 6 kids on the carpet with me, or in one center or one space doing one activity, then I would either just have 2 centers available for the other co-teacher, because I don't want them to be alone in a center. I want them to be socializing and engaging. And with our low numbers, if I split them up too much, then sometimes that gets tricky because there's just one little friend by himself. And so I try to think a lot about our numbers and what would be the most beneficial to them. So some closing thoughts that I have are just, when you're planning to do small group centers or any activities with your young little learners, to think about the 3 H's. And this is really kind of my motto. If you want a skill or a standard to be in their head, it needs to be in their hands. And if you want it to be in their hands, it needs to come from what they have in their hearts, what interests them. I really think that they're more engaged, and it just creates a more meaningful learning experience when it's something that they're interested in. Have an open mind and try to connect and think like the child, but not for the child. And so when you're planning activities, just try to think about where it could lead and where the activity could go, and not necessarily think about what the end goal would be, or what you think the child's going to think or do when they see that activity. And so try to think like the child, but not for the child. It's tricky to explain right now, but but I'll come back to that. So some of the best learning experiences are not the ones sent home in the child's folder. So again, just think about the process over the product, setting the stage and controlling the environment, not the child. So again, just thinking about what you have out for your small groups, what they have access to. Think about how you can control the environment rather than the child. Aim for meaningful and not easy. I know that probably was overwhelming to think, oh my goodness, she has 6 centers out, but I think that it's very much meaningful and it's worth it. And sometimes meaningful is not always easy, but it's worth it. So again, I like to be the facilitator, and I try to tell myself, you are a facilitator, you are ready and willing to assist when called upon. And it's so silly because sometimes when I say that in my head, I think about myself, looking at myself in the mirror, telling myself that every morning, you are a facilitator, you are ready and willing to assist when called upon. And it just helps remind me that I don't need to be hovering and sitting and dictating. I need to be facilitating and helping taking that learning to the next level without hovering and doing that. Give yourself grace. And so when things get messy and you might not get to another activity because you've let the kids, continue their learning and their exploration for 30 minutes longer than you planned, give yourself grace and just remember that it's worth it. And then also to be confident in your why. And so a lot of times I have people come in my room and they look around and they're like, oh, they're just playing. And I think it's important to be confident in your why. And I reflect and I think back on, I call them my theorist tribes. I think about John Dewey and Malaguzzi and all those really essential theorists that paved the way in history for why children learn the way they do. And having that in my back pocket to share with people who come in who don't know about early childhood is just really helpful. And usually when I say Malaguzzi and Reggio Emilia, that kind of makes them like, okay, those people's names sound really smart, and so they don't question anything further. But I do think that it's helpful to have knowledge in your back pocket to share why you're doing what you're doing. And lastly, remember that children are 100% washable. And this is one of the quotes from my Murray State professor. She is a big advocate for play-based learning as well. And we always talk about how messy things can get and how that kind of scares people away from this process. But everything is washable, everything can be cleaned up, and the learning that happens during the messy times is just beautiful. So even though it's messy, it's beautiful and worth it. So that's all I have, and I'm sorry if I talked really fast. I'm kind of like Miss Christie, and it was a little bit intimidating to think about everything I wanted to share and consolidate that to such a short amount of time, but I hope that I didn't frighten anybody with all those messy activities, and I'm open for any questions anyone has.
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. You gave us so much to think about. Think about the heads, the heart, the hands and the heart. Oh my goodness. I know that we're going to be using that. Thank you. It's so much. So let me just say it's open mic. Let's everyone open up their mic and just let's tell us a couple of things that connected with Caitlin's presentation for you, or questions you might have for her.
Okay, I gave y'all plenty of time. I was waiting for somebody else to talk. Girl, can we be best friends? Like, oh my goodness, you make me miss the classroom so much, but you're doing wonderful things. That's exactly what kids need. I do have a question. Are you guys all virtual or not? Or here up in Owensboro, that they just made the call all virtual. So how can they do this stuff at home, like virtually for little bitties? My heart goes out to you guys.
Yes. Well, we are back in the classroom, and we've been in the classroom since the start, and we just recently got the call that we were going to be out on Monday, Tuesday. And so what I find best with my parents, they need specifics on what they do with their child. That's not just, put them on the iPad or put them on the computer or give them a packet. And surprisingly, beginning of the school year, I had a few parents ask, are you guys suspecting that we'll go back to NTI? Like, what will that be like for my preschool child? Are they going to get just packets? And I was like, they will not get a packet. They will not get a packet. And so, but they specifically need other like, alternatives. And so what I like to do is if we are going virtual, like on Monday, Tuesday, I'm going to do some videos, and my parents are familiar with I've been sending home QR codes on my newsletters and guiding them on how to open a QR code using the camera on their phones. And so they're used to that, and they all have smartphones. And so they all can just quickly scan the QR code and watch a video of me doing the read aloud or something. But I also will make a choice board, or on the back of my newsletter. Sometimes I always will put little at-home activities, and I'll give specifics like, after we read this read aloud, then put shaving cream on the table and let your child play in the shaving cream, make the letters in the shaving cream. Get sticky notes and hide letters all around the house and go on a letter hunt, or go outside and go for a walk, get leaves, take them inside, color over the leaves, practice cutting the leaves. And giving them that specific instruction really helps them with being involved, because if I just, told them to practice letters and I kept it brief like that, they would be like, how do I teach my preschooler letters? And so I think that whenever I give them the choice boards and they can look at the different activities and choose what they have access to and what works best with their time schedules at home, that really helps. So
That's great, Caitlin. So what I do now, I left the classroom and I'm a parent coach now. So wonderful job giving them specific ideas because they want to help. They just don't know what they don't know. So way to go. Good job, friend.
oh, thank you.
I would say what resonated with me was the know your why, because that is, I talk to our teachers about that all the time. There are so many people that step into early childhood classrooms and want to just use what they know about upper elementary and apply it to what they see. And that is so not what we want. There's so much important, I think the most important education that's going on is birth to second grade, third grade. That's where it's happening. And when we realize that that's where we need to put our best people, then upper elementary and middle school will benefit from that. So awesome job.
I'm going to give Caitlin a shout out. I work with her here in Christian County. She helps me also with my community events, and we've done several virtual events, and she always does the most amazing videos. It's just like she's right there with the kids, and I always call on her. I know she's like, oh, what does she want now? But she is amazing in what she does. She's innovative. And definitely knows her why. And I mean, we are just blessed to have her in our district. Great job, Caitlin. Thank you. But we just did a virtual event for Hooray for Reading, where we did a read aloud, and we had different activities, and then we had an activity bag that we dropped at different locations that they could pick up and do with the children. And her video is just the best. So great job, Caitlin. Thank you so much.
Caitlin, I just want to share one more thing. I agree with everything, and I saw this in the chat box too. But you really had some natural, just really organic examples of student-led inquiry, and I know that you've done a lot of really cool things with Reggio Emilia, and so that maybe just even comes natural to you. But also differentiation, which is great for all levels of learners, and it just seemed to be really organic in your classroom. So I just wanted to point that out too. That was really noticeable in your presentation. So thank you for sharing so many cool things with us.
Something that's in our chat box from Kelly's reminded us that, we could avoid gaps and significantly reduce all types of things if we did focus, on P to 3 and do the kinds of things that you've shown us. So, and we believe that with our whole heart, because differentiating, letting the kids meet where they are, open task. We know the beauty of open task, all your movement, all the language that comes from. I see that Carlene is saying she wished she could have a love button for what Kelly just said. Yes, because all those, we know that's what makes the difference. I just want to say, I'm always amazed by our presenters and the Birth to Grade 3 Network. And we always want to spend more time, but maybe that's what's great. You know, when you have company over and you just don't want them to leave, it's always much better than when you want them to leave, right? So we appreciate you so much. We're going to skip December, and we'll be back on the third Wednesday. We moved to Wednesday because so many people had regular meetings on those Thursdays that we were getting a problem. So we're the third Wednesday, and we'll be sending out more. We ask you to let us know more topics like this. I'm considering on base what you said before, continue the notion of small group, but also then bring in some family engagement pieces connected to that. Because I know in January we may be in a place where we need more of that. So that's kind of what we're thinking. Please give us feedback. Thank you, Caitlin. If anybody else wants to say anything else, feel free to open the mic, but we'll honor your time and let you log off too. But thank you.
And thank you, everybody. This is a great little village.
Yes. Caitlin, wonderful. My heart was so full.
Thank you. And like I said, this is my jam. This is my kind of stuff, is to educate and share and do it in a way that people can see, you know, what it's like and how it's going. Because it's easy for me to just talk about it, but when I think the pictures and stuff really kind of help bring it to light that it's possible and it's working and the kids enjoy it. I wish I could wear, I think about it all the time. I'm like, I want to get one of those headband cameras that I could just wear around the room and just like video throughout the day, because there's so many great things that just pop up from what we're doing. And but it keeps me on my toes, I will say that. It's a lot of mental thinking, but it's worth it. And